I'm Melissa Thompson, 27, and I never thought I'd see contempt in my parents' eyes as I walked into that courtroom. They sat on the opposite side, my mother Eleanor smoothing her expensive skirt, my father Richard adjusting his tie, both rolling their eyes as I approached with my lawyer. The thick binder I carried contained 15 years of secrets. When the judge opened it, his eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. This wasn't just about money anymore. This case would expose a family betrayal spanning nearly 2 decades, and by the end of the day, nothing about the Thompson family would ever be the same. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should have protected you most, this story might resonate with you. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. The support I've received from across the country has been my strength through this journey. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing up for yourself, even when it means facing your own family, and give this video a like if you've ever had to make the difficult choice between family peace and personal justice. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in suburban Michigan, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our 2-story colonial home in Bloomfield Hills sat on a manicured acre lot with seasonal flower displays my mother Eleanor meticulously planned each year. My father Richard was a senior executive at an automotive consulting firm, bringing home a comfortable 6-figure salary. My mother worked as a real estate agent specializing in luxury properties, more for the social connections than financial necessity. We took annual vacations to Florida or the Carolinas, had a cabin up north on Lake Huron, and generally lived the upper-middle-class suburban dream. From elementary school, the differences between how my parents treated me versus my younger brother Ethan were subtle but persistent. 3 years younger than me, Ethan had my father's athletic build and my mother's charisma. He was the star of family gatherings, while I was the responsible, studious daughter who got patted on the head for good grades but rarely received the effusive praise lavished on my brother. Melissa's always been so self-sufficient, my mother would tell her friends at neighborhood gatherings, as if my independence was a personality trait rather than something I'd developed out of necessity. Ethan needs more guidance, he's so much like Richard was at that age. I threw myself into academics, joining debate club, mock trial, and student government. By junior year, I was taking AP classes and studying for the SAT while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Meanwhile, Ethan was struggling to maintain a C average but excelled at football and baseball, which seemed to matter far more to my parents. When Ethan got his first DUI at 17, my parents hired an expensive lawyer and managed to get it reduced to reckless driving. When he crashed his car 3 months later, they bought him a new one, explaining that he needed reliable transportation for college. When I asked for help with college application fees, my father suggested I get a part-time job. "It builds character, Melissa," he said, not looking up from his newspaper. "You can't expect handouts your entire life." The summer before my senior year, I worked 30 hours a week at the local library, saving for college and applying for every scholarship I could find. My SAT scores were nearly perfect, and I was accepted to several prestigious universities, ultimately choosing University of Michigan because of their generous scholarship package. My parents hosted a modest dinner celebration, giving me a card with $200 inside. 2 months later, when Ethan was recruited to play baseball at a Division II school with a much more modest academic reputation, my parents threw a backyard party with 50 guests, hired catering, and presented him with a MacBook Pro and a credit card for emergencies. The only person who seemed to notice this disparity was my grandmother Agnes, my father's mother. A sharp-witted former schoolteacher, Grandma Agnes had moved in with us when I was 12 after my grandfather passed away. She had her own suite in our finished basement, maintaining some independence while still being part of our daily lives. "You're going to outshine them all one day, Melissa," she would whisper to me after particularly egregious displays of favoritism. "Just keep your head down and do your work. Education is something no one can ever take from you." Grandma Agnes attended every academic competition, debate tournament, and award ceremony of mine that she could physically manage. She kept a scrapbook of my achievements that she displayed proudly in her sitting area. When I was accepted to Michigan, she gave me a beautiful leather-bound journal with a note inside, "To record the beginning of your brilliant future." My undergraduate years passed in a blur of classes, study groups, and part-time jobs. Meanwhile, Ethan dropped out of college after 3 semesters, his baseball career ended by a shoulder injury and poor academic performance. My parents immediately funded his first business venture, a sports memorabilia shop that closed within 8 months. Then came his food truck concept, his attempt at becoming a personal trainer, and finally, his investment opportunity with a friend startup that needed capital. Through it all, I maintained my 3.9 GPA, graduated with honors, and was accepted to Michigan Law School with a partial scholarship. I still needed loans for the remainder, but my parents claimed they couldn't help. "We've got Ethan's business loans to cover, and the market's been tough on our investments," my mother explained, though they had just renovated their kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances. By this point, I'd long accepted the reality of my family dynamic. I took out additional student loans, worked part-time at a law library, and focused on building my future. I specialized in estate law, finding the precise rules and regulations a welcome contrast to the arbitrary favoritism I'd grown up with. During my final year of law school, Grandma Agnes's health began to decline rapidly. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to more serious cognitive issues, and eventually, the doctors diagnosed her with advanced dementia. My parents became her legal guardians and took control of her finances. I visited whenever I could, though she increasingly didn't recognize me. "Who's this lovely young lady?" she would ask my mother, patting my hand. "That's Melissa, Mom," my father would say with forced patience. "Richard's daughter, remember? 6 months ago, shortly after I passed the bar exam and started my position at a small but reputable firm in Detroit, Grandma Agnes passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 87 years old. "At least she's not suffering anymore," my mother said at the modest funeral service they arranged. Little did I know that Grandma Agnes's death would set in motion a series of discoveries that would shatter our family's facade and force me to choose between family peace and personal justice. 2 weeks after the funeral, I took a weekend off work to help clean out Grandma Agnes's living space. My parents had already removed her clothing and personal items for donation, leaving primarily furniture, books, and paperwork to sort through. "Just box up the books for the library donation," my mother instructed. "Your father's already been through her important papers. Anything else can go to recycling." I nodded, but something about their haste to clear out her things bothered me. Grandma Agnes had been meticulously organized her entire life. Her grade books from her teaching days were still labeled by year and class. It seemed disrespectful to simply dump her papers without proper review. While my parents were out at one of Ethan's latest business pitches, a craft brewery concept he was trying to launch, I began methodically going through Grandma's desk. In the bottom drawer, beneath a false bottom I remembered her showing me years ago, "Every woman needs her secrets, Melissa," I found a leather portfolio filled with documents. The first was a letter dated shortly after my birth, from a financial advisor named Martin Greenberg, confirming the establishment of the Melissa Thompson Educational Trust with an initial deposit of $50,000. Attached were quarterly statements spanning several years, showing additional deposits on my birthdays and Christmases. By the time I was 10 years old, the trust had grown to over $120,000. My hands trembled as I continued reading. There were explicit instructions that the money was to be used exclusively for my educational expenses and was to be transferred to my control when I turned 18. My parents had signed acknowledgement forms as trustees. Further in the stack, I found Grandma Agnes's personal journals. She had kept detailed records of her financial decisions, including regular contributions to what she called Melissa's Fund. There were also multiple letters she had written to my parents over the years, emphasizing her wishes. Richard and Eleanor, one letter from when I was 16 read, "I want to reiterate that the educational trust for Melissa is to be used solely for her college and graduate school expenses. I've worked and saved my entire life to provide this opportunity for her, as I see such tremendous potential in her academic pursuits. Please honor these wishes when the time comes." As I continued digging, a sick feeling grew in my stomach. There were no records of this money ever being given to me. I had taken out substantial student loans for law school, working multiple jobs throughout my education to make ends meet. Where had this money, my money, gone? The answer came in the form of a manila envelope labeled Trust Transfer Documentation in my mother's handwriting. Inside were bank records showing that 3 years ago, around the time Grandma Agnes's dementia had worsened significantly, the entire educational trust, by then worth over $180,000, had been transferred into my parents' personal accounts. Worse still were the subsequent bank statements and check copies showing exactly where the money had gone: $45,000 to cover Ethan's failed food truck venture, $30,000 toward his investment opportunity, $62,000 labeled as e-business loan brewery, and various smaller amounts for his car, rent, and other expenses. My entire body felt cold as I examined a spreadsheet in my mother's precise handwriting, detailing the division of my grandmother's gift. There was even a notation beside several entries, from MT Fund. They hadn't even bothered to hide their tracks, they simply never expected me to find out. I sat on Grandma's bed, documents spread around me, and felt a profound sense of betrayal wash over me. This wasn't just about money. This was about years of favoritism culminating in the theft of a gift specifically intended for me, from the one person who had truly believed in my potential. The trust had been substantial enough to cover my entire law school education without loans. Instead, it had been funneled into my brother's failed ventures while I worked myself to exhaustion to fund my education. When I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway, I quickly gathered all the documents, slipped them into my bag, and continued sorting books as if nothing had happened. That night, I made copies of everything before returning to my apartment in Detroit, my mind racing with questions and a growing sense of anger I'd never allowed myself to feel before. For a week, I carried the knowledge of my parents' betrayal like a physical weight. I consulted with a colleague who specialized in trust law, confirming what I already suspected: my parents had violated their fiduciary duty as trustees and misappropriated funds that were legally intended for me. I decided to confront them directly before taking any legal action, hoping against hope there was some explanation I hadn't considered. I arranged to come for Sunday dinner, something we did monthly despite the tension that always simmered beneath our family gatherings. My mother had prepared her specialty, beef Wellington, and my father had opened an expensive bottle of Cabernet. Ethan was there too, excitedly discussing the progress on his brewery concept. Apparently, they had found a potential investor to provide additional capital. I waited until after dinner, when we moved to the living room for coffee. My heart pounded so hard I could feel my blouse fluttering, but I kept my voice steady as I placed Grandma Agnes's portfolio on the coffee table. "I found some interesting documents while cleaning out Grandma's room," I said, opening the folder to reveal the trust paperwork. "I was hoping you could explain these to me." The change in the room was immediate. My father's face flushed dark red, while my mother's complexion went pale. Ethan looked confused, glancing between our parents and me. "Where did you get those?" my father demanded, reaching for the papers. I pulled them back. "From Grandma's desk," I replied. "The educational trust she established for me with explicit instructions that it be used for my education. The one worth $180,000 that was transferred into your accounts 3 years ago. The one you never told me about while I was working 30-hour weeks and taking out loans to pay for law school." My mother's expression shifted from shock to a practiced calm. "Melissa, you're misunderstanding the situation. Your grandmother established that fund years ago, but she later changed her mind about how it should be allocated." "That's interesting," I countered, "because I have her journals and letters specifically stating her intentions, dated all the way up until her cognitive decline. I also have the bank records showing the transfers happened after she was diagnosed with dementia, when you had control of her finances." My father stood up, his voice rising. "How dare you come into our home and accuse us of stealing? After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Because from these records, it looks like you've been funding Ethan's repeated failures with money specifically designated for my education. Money that legally belonged to me." My mother interjected, her tone dismissive. "You got scholarships anyway, so what does it matter? Ethan needed that money more than you did." We made a decision as a family to allocate resources where they were most needed. But it wasn't your decision to make, I insisted, feeling tears threatening but refusing to let them fall. That money was explicitly for my education. Grandma Agnes wanted me to have it. Oh, Mother always did favor you, my father scoffed. Always going on about your potential. Well, we had 2 children to consider, not just you. I turned to Ethan, who had remained suspiciously quiet. Did you know about this? Did you know the money for your brewery came from my educational trust? He squirmed uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Not exactly. I mean, Mom and Dad said Grandma wanted to help with my business ventures. They never said it was originally for you. Well, now you know, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I turned back to my parents. I want the money back. It was legally mine, and I'm prepared to pursue this if necessary. My mother laughed incredulously. You'd sue your own parents? Over money? After we raised you, put a roof over your head, fed and clothed you? This isn't about the basic obligations of parenthood, I replied. This is about you stealing from me. Money that was specifically designated for me by Grandma. You're being selfish and ungrateful, my father thundered. This is exactly why we made the decision we did. You've always been able to take care of yourself, while Ethan has actual vision and needs support to succeed. What kind of person would begrudge their own brother an opportunity to build his future? What about my future? I demanded. I'm starting my career with over $100,000 in student debt that I wouldn't have if you'd given me what was rightfully mine. You're a lawyer now, aren't you? My mother snapped. You'll pay it off eventually. Ethan is trying to build something from nothing. With my money. I couldn't believe their audacity. After nearly an hour of circular arguments, it became clear they had no intention of acknowledging wrongdoing or considering repayment. Their position was firm, they had done what was best for the family, meaning Ethan. My needs and Grandma Agnes's explicit wishes were secondary. If you pursue this, Melissa, you're no longer welcome in this house, my father finally declared, his voice cold. I won't have a daughter who would tear apart her family over money. This isn't about money, I said, gathering my documentation. This is about trust, respect, and honesty, none of which you've shown me. I'll give you 1 week to reconsider and propose a repayment plan. After that, I'll be exploring my legal options. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me, her voice dripping with condescension. You've always been so independent, Melissa. Ethan actually needed our help. A loving sister would understand that. That final barb cut deeper than she could have known. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval by being self-sufficient, only to have that very quality used against me to justify their betrayal. I drove home that night with tears streaming down my face, but with a resolve I'd never felt before. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about standing up for myself and honoring Grandma Agnes's intentions after a lifetime of accepting second place in my own family. The week after confronting my parents passed in a blur of emotional turmoil. I received several text messages from my mother, alternating between guilt trips, your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of this stress, and minimizing my concerns, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. My father didn't contact me directly, but had my uncle call to talk some sense into me. Ethan sent a single message, can we talk, which I wasn't ready to answer. When the week deadline passed with no acknowledgement of wrongdoing or offer of repayment, I knew I needed professional guidance beyond my own legal knowledge. Estate law was my specialty, but I was too emotionally involved to trust my judgment completely. I reached out to Miranda Jacobs, my former law professor who specialized in trust litigation. She had been a mentor during my time at Michigan Law and had recently started her own practice. I brought my documentation to her office in downtown Detroit, feeling both vindicated and heartsick as she reviewed the evidence. Melissa, she said after carefully examining the trust documents, bank statements, and Grandma Agnes's journals, based on what you've shown me, you have a solid case. The trust was clearly established for your educational benefit with explicit instructions. Your parents, as trustees, had a fiduciary duty to honor those terms. So I could win if I sued them? I asked, the reality of taking my parents to court still feeling surreal. Legally speaking, yes. The statute of limitations for breach of fiduciary duty in Michigan is 6 years, so you're well within your rights to pursue this. The documentation is exceptionally clear about your grandmother's intentions, and the paper trail of where the money went is unusually well documented. Miranda leaned forward, her expression softening. That said, Melissa, I need to be clear about what pursuing this would mean. Family lawsuits are among the most emotionally draining cases I handle. They rarely end with reconciliation. Are you prepared for the possibility that this legal action could permanently alter your relationship with your parents and brother? I thought about years of feeling less valued, of working multiple jobs while watching my brother receive endless financial support, of the crushing student loan debt I carried that could have been avoided. I think that relationship was permanently altered when they stole from me, I replied quietly. And again when they showed no remorse when confronted. Miranda nodded. I understand. Let's discuss your options. For the next 2 hours, we explored various approaches. I could file in family court or civil court. We could start with a formal demand letter giving them one final opportunity to settle before filing. We discussed potential outcomes, including judgment amounts, interest calculations, and the possibility of being awarded legal fees. Based on the documentation, we would be seeking the full $180,000 plus interest from the date of misappropriation, Miranda explained. Potentially more, if we factor in the opportunity cost of you taking on student loans. The amount was substantial, close to $230,000 with interest. I knew my parents had the assets to cover it, between their home equity, investment accounts, and vacation property, but it would certainly impact their financial situation significantly. What about precedent? I asked. Have similar cases been successful? Miranda pulled up several case examples on her computer. There's strong precedent for trustees being held accountable for misappropriation of educational trusts, especially when the documentation is as clear as yours. Last year, there was the Hendricks case in Oakland County that was remarkably similar. Grandparent established educational trust, parents diverted funds after assuming power of attorney, court ordered full repayment plus interest and legal fees. As we continued discussing strategy, a part of me still hoped my parents would come to their senses and make this right without court intervention. But another part, the part that had discovered their deliberate betrayal, knew better. If we proceed, I said finally, I want to be thorough. I need to gather any additional evidence that might strengthen the case. Over the next 2 weeks, I did just that. I obtained official copies of all trust documents from the financial institution. I contacted Mr. Greenberg, my grandmother's financial advisor, who provided an affidavit confirming Grandma Agnes's consistent instructions regarding the educational trust. I organized everything chronologically, created a detailed accounting of how the misappropriated funds were spent, and calculated the exact amount of student loan interest I had incurred as a direct result of being denied my trust funds. When everything was in order, Miranda sent a formal demand letter to my parents, outlining the legal issues, the evidence we had compiled, and proposing a settlement arrangement that would allow them to repay the funds without court involvement. Their response came not from them directly, but from an attorney they had retained, a colleague of my father's from his country club. The letter dismissed our claims as a family misunderstanding and suggested that my grandmother had verbally amended her wishes regarding the trust prior to her cognitive decline. It offered no evidence to support this claim and proposed a goodwill settlement of $25,000, less than 15% of what had been taken. This is insulting, I told Miranda when we reviewed their response. They're not even trying to make this right. Unfortunately, this type of initial response is common, she explained. They're testing to see if you'll back down or accept a token settlement. The question now is, are you ready to file the lawsuit? I took a deep breath, thinking about what this would mean. Once we filed, there would be no turning back. Family holidays, shared celebrations, the pretense of normalcy we'd maintained for years, all would likely be sacrificed. Yet continuing to accept their betrayal felt like betraying myself and Grandma Agnes's memory. File the lawsuit, I said firmly. They've had multiple opportunities to make this right. As Miranda began preparing the court filings, my phone buzzed with another call from my mother. This time, I answered. How could you do this to us? She demanded, her voice shrill. Involving lawyers? Threatening to sue your own family? What will people think? The irony of her concern about appearances rather than the actual wrongdoing was not lost on me. I gave you every opportunity to make this right, I replied, keeping my voice steady. This isn't what I wanted, but you've left me no choice. You've always been so selfish, she hissed. Your father and I are discussing removing you from our will entirely. Is that what you want? The threat might have wounded me once, but now it only confirmed I was making the right decision. What I want is justice for what was taken from me, I answered. And to honor Grandma Agnes's wishes. As I ended the call, I felt a strange mix of grief and determination wash over me. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in my life, I was standing up for what I deserved rather than accepting less to keep the peace. Would you fight for what's rightfully yours, even if it meant potentially losing your family in the process? This was the crossroads I found myself at. If you're facing a similar difficult decision, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to hear the courtroom showdown in the next part of my story. Your support means everything during this journey. Word of the lawsuit spread through our extended family like wildfire. Within days of the filing, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from relatives, each taking sides in a conflict many of them barely understood. My mother's sister, Aunt Sarah, was the first to call. Melissa, I can't believe you're doing this to your parents, she began without preamble. After everything they've done for you. What exactly do you think they've done for me, Aunt Sarah? I asked calmly. Did my mother tell you they took $180,000 that was specifically left to me by Grandma Agnes and gave it to Ethan instead? Well, no, she admitted. Eleanor just said you were being unreasonable about some old account of your grandmother's. That you were jealous of the help they'd given Ethan with his businesses. I wasn't surprised by my mother's selective sharing of information. I suggest you ask them for the complete story before passing judgment. I'm not discussing the details of a pending legal case, but I'll just say there's a reason their attorney advised them to settle rather than go to court. Not all family reactions were negative. Surprisingly, my father's brother Thomas reached out with a different perspective. I read the court filing, he said when we met for coffee. As an accountant, he had a better understanding of the financial aspects than most. This doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Richard and I grew up with the same dynamic, me working my tail off for approval while he was handed everything. I always noticed how they treated you versus Ethan. His support was unexpected but deeply appreciated. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. Uncle Thomas sighed. Family dynamics are complicated. I tried once or twice, but your father shut me down immediately. I should have tried harder, especially when I saw the pattern repeating with you kids. I'm sorry, Melissa. The most painful aspect of the family division was watching my mother's calculated campaign to control the narrative. She began posting throwback family photos on social media with captions like "Family is everything Red Heart" and "So blessed by our children, even when times are challenging." To anyone unaware of the lawsuit, she appeared to be a devoted mother going through some unspecified difficulty. When she posted a photo of herself, my father, and Ethan at his brewery site with the caption "Always supporting our children's dreams," I had to shut down my social media accounts temporarily for my own mental health. Meanwhile, Ethan was caught in the middle. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, he texted me, "Can we meet? Just us?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between Detroit and our parents' home. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, hair unwashed, the strain evident in his face. "I didn't know," were his first words as he slid into the booth. "About the money being from your trust. Mom and Dad told me it was from Grandma's general estate, meant for both of us." I wasn't sure whether to believe him, but his distress seemed genuine. "When did you find out the truth?" I asked. "After your confrontation at dinner." I asked Dad directly, and he finally admitted it was originally set up for your education. But he justified it, saying Grandma would have wanted to support me too if she'd seen my business plans. He shook his head. "I'm not sure I believe that anymore." "And what do you think now?" I asked cautiously. Ethan stared into his coffee cup. "I think I've been living in a bubble. Every time I failed, they bailed me out. No consequences, just more money. Meanwhile, you were working yourself to exhaustion and taking out loans." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry, Melissa. I should have questioned where all that money was coming from." His apology felt sincere, but I wasn't ready to fully absolve him. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Mom and Dad expect me to testify on their behalf, saying Grandma verbally told me the money was for both of us. But she never said anything like that to me. I don't want to lie under oath, but they're threatening to cut me off if I don't support them." He laughed bitterly. "First time they've ever threatened me with actual consequences." His moral dilemma wasn't my problem to solve, but I felt a flicker of hope that at least one family relationship might survive this ordeal. "You have to make your own decision, Ethan. But for what it's worth, I think the truth would set both of us free from some unhealthy patterns." As the court date approached, the pressure intensified. Anonymous messages appeared on my phone. "Is the money worth destroying your family?" That I strongly suspected came from my mother. Friends of my parents, people I'd known my entire life, began treating me coldly when I encountered them around town. The night before a scheduled deposition, I received a call from my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Melissa," she began, her voice tremulous and tearful, "I'm begging you to reconsider this lawsuit. Your father's not sleeping, his doctor is concerned about his heart. Is this really worth risking your father's health over?" The emotional manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "If you're concerned about Dad's health, you should advise him to settle the lawsuit rather than fight a losing battle," I replied coolly. "We raised you better than this," she said, her tone shifting from pleading to accusatory. "I don't even recognize who you've become." "That's interesting," I replied, "because I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be, someone who stands up for herself. Grandma Agnes would be proud." The mention of my grandmother seemed to inflame her further. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of you tearing apart the family over money." "No, Mom," I said with sudden clarity. "Grandma Agnes would be ashamed of you and Dad for stealing from your own daughter. She saw how you treated me differently my entire life, and she tried to give me one advantage that couldn't be taken away. Except you found a way to take that, too." After hanging up, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by case documentation, and wondered if this fight was worth the toll it was taking. Then I opened Grandma Agnes's journal to an entry from my high school graduation. "Watched my Melissa graduate as valedictorian today. Richard and Eleanor seemed more concerned about Ethan's baseball game tomorrow than celebrating her achievement. One day she will realize her true worth isn't determined by their approval. The educational fund is my promise to her future, something no one can diminish or take away." Reading her words renewed my resolve. This lawsuit wasn't just about money, it was about honoring the one person who had truly seen and valued me, and about finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of accepting less than I deserved. As I prepared for court, I found unexpected strength in the knowledge that whatever family remained after this battle would be built on honesty rather than denial, respect rather than manipulation, and genuine love rather than conditional approval. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a stomach-churning mix of anxiety and determination. I'd barely slept, going over potential scenarios in my mind all night. Miranda had prepared me extensively, but nothing could fully ready me for facing my parents across a courtroom. I chose my outfit carefully, a conservative navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a neat bun. Professional, but not intimidating. Miranda had advised me to appear respectful of the court without seeming calculated. Remember, she'd said during our final preparation session, Judge Lawrence Montgomery has a reputation for being thorough and fair, but he doesn't tolerate emotional theatrics in his courtroom. Stick to the facts, answer questions directly, and let the evidence speak for itself. The Oakland County Circuit Court building was imposing, a massive concrete structure in Pontiac that seemed designed to remind entrants of the serious nature of legal proceedings. I met Miranda in the lobby, and we reviewed our strategy one final time before heading to courtroom 4B. I wasn't prepared for the crowd awaiting us. Not only were my parents and brother present, but it seemed every extended family member and family friend had turned out as well. My mother's sisters, my father's golfing buddies, neighbors from my childhood, all were seated behind my parents in a show of solidarity. Only Uncle Thomas sat on my side of the courtroom, giving me a supportive nod as I entered. My parents were seated at the defendant's table with their attorney, Gerald Hoffman, a polished man in his 60s who specialized in wealth management disputes. My father wore his best suit, the one reserved for important client meetings, and my mother was dressed in a conservative beige dress that somehow managed to make her look both elegant and victimized. When they saw me enter with Miranda, both rolled their eyes dismissively, my mother leaning over to whisper something to my father. The gesture was so condescending, so familiar from my childhood when I'd say something they considered naive or silly, that it momentarily knocked the wind from me. Miranda noticed my faltering step and placed a steadying hand on my elbow. "Remember why we're here," she murmured. "The evidence is on our side." We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, arranging our documentation in precise order. The thick binder containing Grandma Agnes's journals, the trust documentation, and the financial records sat prominently before us. I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation, remembering my grandmother's final coherent words to me before dementia took her clarity: "You have more strength than you know, Melissa." "All rise for the Honorable Judge Lawrence Montgomery," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom rose as the judge entered, a tall man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to assess the room in one comprehensive glance. After the initial formalities, Miranda presented our opening statement, clearly outlining the establishment of the Educational Trust, its explicit purpose, and the documented misappropriation by my parents. She emphasized the clarity of my grandmother's intentions and the pattern of financial documents showing exactly where the money had gone. "Your Honor," she concluded, "this is a straightforward case of breach of fiduciary duty. The defendants, as trustees, had a legal obligation to administer the trust according to its stated purpose, Melissa Thompson's education. Instead, they diverted these funds to their son's various business ventures without Ms. Thompson's knowledge or consent. We are seeking full restitution of the $180,000 plus interest, as well as legal fees." Gerald Hoffman then presented the defense, his tone reasonable and slightly paternal, as if explaining a simple misunderstanding. "Your Honor, this case is about a grandmother's love for her family and her desire to see all her grandchildren succeed. While the original trust was indeed established for educational purposes, Agnes Thompson later verbally modified her wishes to allow for broader support of both her grandchildren's futures. Richard and Eleanor Thompson, as devoted parents, made the difficult but necessary decision to allocate these resources where they were most urgently needed at the time. I bit my lip to keep from objecting audibly. There was no evidence whatsoever of this verbal modification. They were essentially claiming Grandma Agnes had changed her mind but conveniently told only them, after she began showing signs of cognitive decline. Hoffman continued, "Furthermore, Your Honor, the plaintiff has suffered no material harm. She successfully completed her education, secured employment in her chosen field, and is fully capable of managing any student loan obligations she incurred. This lawsuit appears motivated more by sibling rivalry than by genuine grievance." Judge Montgomery listened attentively to both opening statements, occasionally making notes but offering no reaction. When Hoffman concluded, the judge looked at his watch. "We'll proceed with testimony from the defendants first, then the plaintiff. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, please take the stand." My parents were sworn in together, an unusual arrangement that Miranda whispered was likely due to the family nature of the case. My father spoke first, describing his mother's supposed change of heart. Mom always wanted to support both her grandchildren equally, he testified. Yes, the original paperwork mentioned Melissa's education, but as Ethan grew older and showed entrepreneurial promise, she told us specifically that she wanted to help him too. She said, and I quote, "Use the money where it's most needed for the kids." My mother nodded emphatically beside him. When it was her turn to speak, she elaborated on this narrative. "Agnes and I were very close," she said, her voice taking on a quavering quality I recognized from whenever she wanted to appear vulnerable. "She confided in me that she was concerned about Ethan's future and wanted to ensure both children had the support they needed. Melissa was always academically gifted and received substantial scholarships. Agnes recognized that Ethan's path would require different kinds of support." Judge Montgomery interrupted, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Thompson, do you have any documentation of these conversations? Letters, emails, recordings, witnesses?" My mother's composure faltered slightly. "No, Your Honor. These were private conversations between family members. We didn't think we needed to document them." "I see," the judge replied, making a note. "Please continue." My parents described their decision-making process in transferring the funds, framing it as a difficult but necessary choice made with both children's best interests at heart. My father emphasized how they had supported me throughout my education in other ways, providing housing during breaks, occasional spending money, emotional support. When Hoffman asked about their relationship with me, my father sighed heavily. "Melissa has always been different. Very independent, somewhat distant. When she discovered the trust documentation, she jumped to conclusions without allowing us to explain the full context. We're deeply hurt that she's chosen to sue her own family rather than discuss this matter privately." Miranda's cross-examination was precise and devastating. She had my parents confirm they were aware of the written terms of the trust. She established the timeline of the fund transfers, coinciding with Grandma Agnes's cognitive decline. She had them acknowledge that they never informed me about the trust at any point, before or after transferring the funds. "Mr. Thompson," Miranda asked, "if your mother truly intended for these funds to be used for both grandchildren's benefit, why didn't you divide the money equally? According to the financial records, approximately 85% of the trust went to expenses related to your son, and none to your daughter." My father shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's needs were more immediate and substantial. Melissa was doing fine on her own. "And did you consult Melissa about this decision? Did you inform her that funds specifically designated for her education were being diverted to her brother's business ventures?" "No," my father admitted. "We didn't think it was necessary to involve her in family financial decisions." "Family financial decisions," Miranda repeated. "But this wasn't general family money, was it? This was a trust specifically established for Melissa's education, with you and your wife as trustees, a legal position that required you to act in the beneficiary's best interest, not your own preference." By the time Miranda finished her questioning, my parents' narrative had numerous holes. The judge's expression remained impassive, but I noticed him paying particular attention when Miranda highlighted the timing of the fund transfers relative to Grandma Agnes's cognitive decline. As the morning session drew to a close, Judge Montgomery called a brief recess before we would present our side of the case. As people filed out of the courtroom, I noticed my brother Ethan remaining in his seat, looking troubled. Our eyes met briefly before I turned away, steeling myself for the afternoon testimony that would require me to publicly challenge my family's version of events for perhaps the first time in my life. When court reconvened after lunch, the energy in the room had shifted. Several family friends who had been sitting behind my parents had departed, perhaps uncomfortable with the discrepancies revealed in the morning testimony. Uncle Thomas had been joined by two of my friends from law school, their presence a silent counterbalance to my parents' supporters. Miranda began by calling me to the stand. As I was sworn in, I caught my mother's eye. Rather than the intimidation I expected to feel, I was surprised to find myself feeling strangely calm. The truth was on my side, documented in black and white. "Ms. Thompson," Miranda began, "when did you first learn about the educational trust your grandmother established for you?" 6 months ago, after my grandmother's death, I replied clearly. I was helping clean out her living area and found documentation in her personal files. Prior to this discovery, had your parents ever mentioned this trust to you? Never. Not when I was applying to colleges, not when I was taking out student loans for law school, not at any point. Miranda guided me through a systematic presentation of the evidence we had gathered. I described finding the trust documents, the bank transfer records, and most damaging, Grandma Agnes's journals and letters explicitly stating her intentions for the money. Your Honor, Miranda said, I'd like to enter into evidence the journal entries written by Agnes Thompson from 2010 through 2020. She handed copies to the judge, my parents' attorney, and placed one before me on the witness stand. Ms. Thompson, could you please read the entry dated March 15, 2018? I found the page and began reading my grandmother's precise handwriting. Spoke with Richard today about Melissa's educational fund. I reminded him that the money is exclusively for her law school expenses when the time comes. He seemed distracted and changed the subject quickly. I'm concerned he doesn't take my wishes seriously, but the paperwork is clear. I've worked too hard saving this money to see it used for anything other than its intended purpose. Melissa deserves this opportunity without the burden of excessive debt. Similar entries followed, each reinforcing Grandma Agnes's clear intent and growing concern about my parents' attitudes toward the trust. The journal entries continued until her cognitive decline began in earnest, at which point her handwriting became shaky and entries grew sporadic and confused. Next, Miranda presented the financial records showing exactly how the money had been spent after being transferred from the trust. Ms. Thompson, what is this document? Miranda asked, displaying a spreadsheet. This is a financial tracking document in my mother's handwriting, showing how the trust money was allocated. As you can see, there are notations like E-business loan, brewery, $62,000 from MT fund and E-car payment, $4,200 from MT fund. And MT fund would refer to Melissa Thompson Fund. My educational trust. Judge Montgomery studied the document with particular interest, asking to see the original rather than just the copy. Miranda then called Martin Greenberg, my grandmother's financial advisor for over 20 years, to the stand. His testimony was brief but powerful. Agnes Thompson was extremely clear about the purpose of this trust, he stated. She established it specifically for Melissa's educational expenses and reiterated those instructions every time we reviewed her portfolio. She was particularly explicit that the funds were not to be commingled with general family finances or used for any other purpose. Did she ever indicate to you that she had changed her mind or wanted the funds to be available for both grandchildren? Miranda asked. Absolutely not, Mr. Greenberg replied firmly. In fact, in our last coherent conversation before her cognitive decline, she expressed concern that Richard and Eleanor might not honor her wishes regarding Melissa's fund. She asked me to keep copies of all documentation, which I have provided to the court. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination attempted to characterize Mr. Greenberg as being out of the loop regarding Agnes's personal conversations with family, but the financial advisor stood firm. Mrs. Thompson was meticulous about her financial instructions, he testified. Any change to the purpose of a significant trust would have been documented through proper channels, not through casual conversation. The most unexpected testimony came when Miranda called my brother Ethan to the stand. I hadn't been sure he would appear, much less testify, but he walked to the witness box looking nervous but determined. Mr. Thompson, Miranda began gently, were you aware of the educational trust your grandmother established for your sister? Ethan cleared his throat. Not until recently. After Melissa confronted our parents, I asked them directly about it. They admitted the money had originally been designated for her education but claimed Grandma had verbally amended her wishes. Did your grandmother ever discuss this with you personally? Ethan glanced at our parents, then back to Miranda. No. Grandma Agnes never told me anything about wanting to fund my business ventures with Melissa's educational money. A small gasp came from my mother, and my father's face darkened. Mr. Thompson, are you aware of how the trust funds were ultimately used? Ethan nodded. They were used primarily to fund my brewery concept, my food truck venture before that, and to cover various personal expenses of mine including a car and rent payments. And how do you feel about that now? Hoffman stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? I'll allow it, Judge Montgomery replied. The witness's understanding of the situation is pertinent to establishing the family dynamic and decision-making process. Ethan took a deep breath. I feel terrible. I didn't know the money came from Melissa's educational trust, but I should have questioned where such large amounts were coming from. I benefited my entire life from preferential treatment while watching Melissa work herself to exhaustion to earn what was handed to me. If I had known the truth, I never would have accepted that money. My eyes welled with unexpected tears at my brother's honesty. Across the courtroom, my mother was silently fuming, while my father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. After Ethan stepped down, Judge Montgomery called for a 20-minute recess before final arguments. In the hallway, Ethan approached me hesitantly. I'm sorry, he said simply. I should have done that years ago. I nodded, not quite ready to forgive completely but appreciating his courage in the courtroom. Thank you for telling the truth. When court resumed, Miranda delivered a concise closing argument emphasizing the clear documentation, the timing of the transfers relative to Grandma Agnes's declining health, and my parents' breach of their fiduciary duty as trustees. Hoffman's closing attempted to reframe the case as an unfortunate family misunderstanding rather than a legal violation, suggesting a nominal settlement would be appropriate given the ambiguity of Agnes Thompson's later wishes. Judge Montgomery listened carefully to both sides before addressing the courtroom. I'll be brief, he began. This case, while emotionally complex as all family matters tend to be, is legally quite straightforward. A trust was established with clear written instructions regarding its purpose. The trustees had a fiduciary responsibility to administer that trust according to those instructions. Based on the evidence presented, including the contemporaneous journal entries, financial documentation, and testimony from multiple witnesses, I find that Richard and Eleanor Thompson breached that fiduciary duty when they diverted funds from Melissa Thompson's educational trust to other purposes without her knowledge or consent. My parents stiffened in their seats as the judge continued. The court orders the defendants to repay the full amount of $180,000, plus interest calculated from the date of the first unauthorized transfer, totaling $232,450. Additionally, given the clear breach of fiduciary duty and the need for legal action to remedy this situation, the defendants will also be responsible for the plaintiff's reasonable legal fees as determined by the court. Judge Montgomery paused, removing his glasses. I would like to add a personal observation, if I may. Fiduciary duty is not merely a legal obligation but a moral one. When we accept responsibility for managing resources intended for another person's benefit, we commit to setting aside our own preferences in favor of the beneficiary's interests and the grantor's explicit wishes. This court finds it particularly troubling that the breach occurred as the trust's creator was experiencing cognitive decline, effectively silencing her ability to advocate for her clearly documented intentions. With that, he gathered his papers and concluded the proceedings. The courtroom began to empty, my parents huddled with their attorney in intense conversation. As Miranda and I collected our documentation, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I had won, but at what cost? Outside the courtroom, my parents attempted to approach me, but Miranda deftly guided me toward the exit. I caught snippets of my mother's voice, "Melissa, we need to talk," but I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. In the courthouse hallway, I overheard my mother blame my father. "I told you we should have hidden it better." That casual comment, revealing more about their true character than any testimony, confirmed I had made the right decision in pursuing this case. This wasn't about money, it was about truth, respect, and finally standing up for myself after a lifetime in the shadows. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse closed behind me with a symbolic thud. Standing on the wide stone steps, the late afternoon sunshine felt surreal after hours in the fluorescent-lit courtroom. Miranda placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did wonderfully in there," she said. Judge Montgomery's ruling was comprehensive, everything we asked for, plus legal fees. That doesn't happen every day. I nodded, still processing. Thank you for believing in me and taking this case. The evidence spoke for itself, Miranda replied. But your testimony was compelling because it came from a place of principle, not vindictiveness. The judge recognized that. Uncle Thomas approached, giving me an awkward but sincere hug. I'm proud of you, Melissa. It took courage to do what you did today. As we discussed the next steps, the formal judgment would be issued within days, after which my parents would have 30 days to arrange payment. I noticed my brother standing alone near the parking lot, clearly waiting for me. I'll catch up with you, I told Miranda and Uncle Thomas, and made my way over to Ethan. That was quite something in there, I said, unsure how to begin. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit since childhood. I didn't plan to testify, he admitted. I came just to observe, but hearing their version of events. He shook his head. I couldn't let it stand. Mom and Dad looked ready to disown you on the spot, I said. Probably will, he replied with a grimace. Dad already told me I'm cut off financially. For the first time in my life, apparently. How does that feel? I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question. Terrifying. But also, necessary? I'm 24 years old, Melissa. It's time I stood on my own feet instead of being their eternal project. A complicated mix of emotions churned inside me. Lingering resentment for years of favoritism, appreciation for his honesty today, uncertainty about our relationship moving forward. What will you do about the brewery? I asked. Shut it down, he said decisively. It was never going to work anyway. I didn't have the experience or the business acumen. Just another fantasy Dad was funding to keep me dependent on them. He hesitated. I've applied for a job at Miller Construction. Entry level, but it's honest work. That's good, Ethan. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quickly. I benefited from their favoritism my entire life, even if I didn't know about the trust specifically. But I want you to know I'm sorry, and I'm going to try to be better. Before I could respond, commotion erupted near the courthouse doors. My parents had emerged with their attorney, and several family members were gathered around them. My mother spotted me with Ethan and started in our direction, my father reluctantly following. Melissa, my mother called, her voice carrying across the parking lot. We need to talk about this ridiculous ruling. Miranda, seeing the situation developing, quickly intervened, positioning herself between us. Mrs. Thompson, all communication should go through counsel at this point. The judge has ruled, and the matter is settled pending payment of the judgment. This is family business, my mother insisted, attempting to sidestep Miranda. This became legal business when you misappropriated trust funds, Miranda replied coolly. My client has no obligation to discuss this with you directly. My father, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both, finally spoke. So this is how it's going to be? You take your pound of flesh and walk away from your family? Finding my voice, I stepped forward. You made this about money when you stole from me, Dad. I made it about accountability. We did what was best for this family, he insisted. You did what was best for Ethan, I corrected him. You've always done what was best for Ethan, even when it meant taking from me. The difference is now there are consequences. My mother turned her attention to Ethan, her tone shifting to wounded disbelief. And you? Testifying against your own parents? After everything we've sacrificed for you? Ethan stood straighter than I'd ever seen him. You didn't sacrifice, Mom. You sacrificed Melissa for me. There's a difference. A crowd of courthouse employees and other case participants had gathered, drawn by the family drama unfolding on the steps. Realizing they were creating a scene, my parents reluctantly retreated to their car, my mother casting one last wounded look over her shoulder that might have affected me once but now seemed merely theatrical. As they drove away, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but noticeably. The truth had been spoken aloud, acknowledged by a neutral third party, and validated in the form of a legal judgment. For perhaps the first time in my life, I hadn't backed down to preserve family harmony at my own expense. Back in my apartment that evening, I sat alone in my car for several minutes, overwhelmed by the emotions of the day. Victory felt different than I had imagined, less triumphant glee and more quiet vindication, tinged with sadness for what could have been if my parents had made different choices. My phone buzzed with messages from extended family members, some supportive but many critical of my decision to air family laundry in public. Aunt Sarah had sent a particularly scathing text: "Your parents gave you life and opportunities, and this is how you repay them? With public humiliation? I hope the money brings you happiness, because you've lost more than you know." I didn't bother responding. Those who had witnessed the systematic favoritism throughout my childhood understood my actions. Those who hadn't likely never would. Instead, I called Miranda to thank her again and confirm our next steps. The formal judgment would be processed within days, and my parents would receive official notification of the amount due and the payment deadline. "Do you think they'll appeal?" I asked. "They could try," Miranda replied, "but it would be throwing good money after bad." Judge Montgomery's ruling was decisive and well supported by evidence. An appellate court would be unlikely to overturn it. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the sunset over Detroit. The city lights began to twinkle on, each one a separate story, a separate life unfolding with its own complications and contradictions. I thought about Grandma Agnes, wondering if she knew, somewhere, that her wishes had finally been honored. I thought about the education she had so wanted to provide for me, and how I'd managed to achieve it anyway, through scholarships and loans and sheer determination. I thought about my brother's testimony and what it must have cost him to speak truth to our parents for perhaps the first time in his life. Mostly, though, I thought about the future, a future where I was no longer defined by my role as the less favored child, where I had stood up for myself and won, where the dynamics that had shaped my family for generations had finally been challenged. It wasn't the neat, happy ending of a fairy tale. Family rifts rarely heal completely, and trust, once broken, is painstaking to rebuild. But it was a beginning of sorts, a beginning of a new chapter where truth mattered more than appearance, and where justice, however delayed, had finally been served. 6 months passed before I spoke directly to my parents again. The court judgment was processed as expected, and after an initial threat to appeal, their attorney advised them to comply with the ruling. They ultimately sold their vacation property on Lake Huron to satisfy the judgment, transferring the full amount, $232,450 plus legal fees, to an account established by my attorney. The first thing I did with the recovered funds was pay off my student loans. The sense of freedom as I submitted that final payment was indescribable, a weight lifted that I had carried since my first day of law school. The remaining money I invested, setting aside a portion for a special purpose I had been contemplating since the court case ended. My parents made several attempts at reconciliation, though reconciliation in their minds seemed to mean resuming our relationship without acknowledging the past. My mother left voicemails suggesting Sunday dinners to put this unpleasantness behind us. My father sent an email proposing we move forward as a family without any mention of their actions or the court case. I responded with a simple, clear boundary: I would consider rebuilding our relationship only after they acknowledged the harm they had caused and took responsibility for their actions. Their reply was telling, a lengthy message about different perspectives and family dynamics that carefully avoided any admission of wrongdoing or apology. Uncle Thomas became an unexpected source of support during this period. We met for coffee every few weeks, and he shared stories about my father's childhood that helped me understand the generational patterns at play. "Your grandfather was the same way with Richard," he explained during one of our conversations. "Constant praise and financial support for him, criticism and neglect for me. It doesn't excuse what they did to you, but it helps explain the pattern." My relationship with Ethan evolved in surprising ways. True to his word, he had shut down the brewery venture and taken the construction job. We began meeting occasionally for lunch, rebuilding our sibling relationship on more honest terms. During one such lunch, he confessed, "I've been seeing a therapist. Trying to understand why I accepted being the golden child for so long without questioning it." "And?" I asked, curious about his insights. "It was easier," he admitted. "Being the favorite meant never having to work for approval. But it also meant never developing any real confidence in my own abilities. Everything was handed to me, so I never knew if I could actually achieve anything on my own." He looked at me with newfound respect. "You always knew. Every accomplishment you've ever had was earned." 3 months after the court case, I established the Agnes Thompson Educational Scholarship at my alma mater, dedicated to supporting first-generation law students with demonstrated financial need. The irony wasn't lost on me. My grandmother's gift would now help multiple students access education, just as she had intended for me. At the small ceremony establishing the scholarship, I met several of Grandma Agnes's old friends from her teaching days. They shared stories I'd never heard, painting a picture of a young Agnes standing up to school administrators in the 1960s to advocate for equal educational opportunities for female students. "She was always ahead of her time," explained Marion Whitaker, her colleague of 30 years. "Agnes believed education was the great equalizer, especially for women. She would be so proud of how you've honored her legacy." Professionally, the experience transformed my approach to estate law. I began specializing in cases involving trust violations and fiduciary breaches, often taking on clients who couldn't afford substantial retainers. The perspective I gained from my own experience made me particularly effective at identifying patterns of manipulation and financial mismanagement in family trust situations. Miranda Jacobs, impressed with how I had handled myself throughout my own case, offered me a position at her growing practice. The opportunity to work alongside the attorney who had helped me find justice was too perfect to pass up. My first Thanksgiving after the lawsuit was spent with Uncle Thomas and his family, along with Ethan, who arrived looking nervous but determined to establish new holiday traditions. My parents hosted their usual gathering, surrounded by the family members who had taken their side, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while a significant piece of their family was conspicuously absent. Winter turned to spring, and with the changing seasons came a sense of renewal. The raw wound of betrayal had scarred over, not gone but no longer acutely painful. I found myself thinking less about what I had lost, the fantasy of a supportive, loving family, and more about what I had gained, self-respect, financial freedom, authentic relationships, and professional purpose. On the anniversary of Grandma Agnes's death, I visited her grave with a bouquet of her favorite yellow roses. The cemetery was peaceful, spring flowers pushing up through the recently thawed ground. I sat beside her headstone and told her everything: the discovery, the lawsuit, the aftermath, and the scholarship established in her name. "You always saw me clearly," I said to the quiet stone. "Even when no one else did. Thank you for trying to give me a gift, and thank you for giving me the strength to fight for it when it was taken away. I hope you would be proud of how I've used it." As I placed the flowers against her headstone, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ethan, "Just got promoted to site supervisor. First achievement that's actually mine. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled, feeling a complex mix of emotions: pride in my brother's growing independence, hope for our evolving relationship, and a deep-seated peace with my own decisions. Driving home, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The family I had known was irreparably altered, but perhaps it had never been what I imagined it to be. In its place was something more honest, relationships based on respect rather than obligation, boundaries rather than manipulation, and truth rather than appearance. The lawsuit had never been about the money, though the financial relief was significant. It had been about honoring my grandmother's wishes, standing up for myself after a lifetime of acquiescence, and breaking a generational pattern of favoritism and denial. As difficult as the process had been, I wouldn't change my decision to pursue justice. Some family bonds, I had learned, are strengthened by challenge and honesty, while others don't survive exposure to truth. The ones that remained in my life now were built on a stronger foundation than before. I pulled into my apartment complex, noticing the spring flowers my landlord had planted around the entrance. Life continues, seasons change, wounds heal, and lessons learned become wisdom to carry forward. Grandma Agnes had given me more than just a financial gift, she had given me the example of a woman who stood by her principles and fought for what she believed in. That legacy was perhaps the most valuable inheritance of all. Have you ever had to stand up to your family for something you believed was right? The journey I've shared isn't just my story, it's about finding the courage to break unhealthy patterns even when it's painful. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Your comments mean everything to me. I read every single one and find strength in knowing others have walked similar paths. Share your experiences below if you feel comfortable, or just let me know you're here. And if you know someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves, even against family, please share this video with them. Thank you for being part of my healing journey. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for your family, is to speak your truth with courage and conviction. Until next time, this is Melissa Thompson, wishing you the strength to honor your worth in every relationship in your life.